Well, Dr. Luke, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Arlena, for having me. It's a pleasure.
I was going to say this morning, so it's morning for you. Are you in New Zealand?
Yeah, I'm in Auckland, New Zealand. So it's 9:30 in the
Um,
morning. The cyclone has just passed, and it's a beautiful summer, sunny day. We
Very
haven't had
nice.
summer pretty much at all, so it's good to have the hot weather back.
Nice. A cyclone. I don't get those here in Idaho. It's just
We we
shocking.
very we very rarely get something like that. So it was just a freak occurrence. It did its damage, but luckily, it's passed and we're recovering.
Good. Well, sounds like you're okay over there.
Yeah, we were one of the fortunate few, or we didn't have too much damage. It was very windy. We were a little surprised. Sometimes the media blows things out of proportion, but in this case, we're looking out the window and it's horizontal rain. We're like, okay,
Wow.
maybe it is quite windy.
Maybe it is. You're just so zen. It just doesn't even register.
Well, that's what we practice, right? That's why we practice so we can face life's storms and
Weather the
or
storms.
exactly.
Yes. What a
Yeah, so
metaphor. Well, that'll be
there
a
it
good
is.
segue into what we're discussing today. We're going to go over your story. So you're going to be talking about porn addiction, but we're really going to be focusing on your book today. So you have is it already out or is it about to be released?
It's already out. It's been out for a couple months. So yeah,
Ah,
it's well and
congratulations.
truly spreading around the world now. So it's lovely to hear some of the feedback and from readers. It's always a joy.
Oh man, that is so much work. I'm working on a second draft and it's painful to say the
Yes.
least.
Yeah. I I think that if anyone is wanting to write a book, they should really, really consider life's choices because it is a
Yeah.
an extreme form of self-flagellation to write a book.
It's a lot of work. That is
Yeah.
for damn sure. So congratulations on having that done. It's called Somawise, Get Out of Your Head and Into Your Body. And then I also read it's like a second tagline, how the body, I can't read my writing, how the body holds the answers to holistic well-being, authentic change, and peaceful relationships. That's what we all want, right?
Yes, yes. In fact, it is what we all want. I've been working with people for 20 years, and um, those three are at the core of why people seek change. On the surface, it may sound like a different story or different circumstance, but at the core of it, it's one of those three things: holistic well-being, authentic change, moving away from some kind of behavior, or more peaceful, harmonious relationships. It really is the foundational um, reason for seeking change.
Yeah, absolutely. I know from personal experience that when there is a relationship in your life that is really painful, there's nothing more motivating than, seeking change. So we'll talk about the book. But so that people can get to know you a little bit. I would love to hear your story as you feel comfortable telling it. When we talk about porn addiction, it's something that people don't really talk about a whole lot, right? It's so easily accessible. I feel like I'm a parent of adult boys, men now, I guess. I still see them as my babies, but that's beside the point. But they were like the first generation that grew up with, the internet, right? And access to all kinds of things. And, as parents, we did our best to regulate that stuff, but I have no illusions. I'm sure that they were exposed to way too much, way too soon. And the way that pornography has progressed, um, I'm just aware that it can be one of those things that's super secretive. Like it's not something that shows, like if you have a food addiction, it shows on your body. If you have alcohol addiction, it shows like when you drink, or do you know what I'm saying? So it's one of those things that's easily hidden. So I'm very
Yeah.
curious, like how it became a problem. Like, is there a healthy use of porn? Like
Yeah.
when does it become
Yeah.
a problem? So many
Okay.
questions.
Yeah, lots to discuss. But firstly, I do want to acknowledge you're really onto it in terms of porn being a very unique behavior, a unique substance that people might have a problematic relationship with because, as you said, it's free, it's readily available, and the evidence of its use is hidden, right? It doesn't really impact us physically the way cigarettes might or alcohol does. Um, So instead, the ramifications are hidden. They're more psychological. Someone might, the way they might engage with sex, because pornography, mainstream pornography provides the scripts through which a lot of these young kids are learning about sex. Maybe the evidence of that use doesn't really come into effect until they actually engage in sexual intimate relationships. So that's also startling, and hopefully one of the reasons why it's so important to have proper sex education for kids when they're ready. But in terms of what is a healthy use, this bridges the gap sort of into the conversation of my journey through porn and porn addiction, is that it's really up to the individual to decide what is healthy and it isn't healthy. And it requires a ruthless honesty to really reflect on that. The same way you can't tell, the only person that can tell an alcoholic they're an alcoholic is them. So until you realize, or until the individual realizes that there's something in this relationship with the substance or behavior that's impacting the rest of my life. Otherwise, the person will never really identify it as a problem. For me, I guess I started queuing up or picking up on that it wasn't very healthy for me, probably in my very early 20s. And it was because I realized that, again, in hindsight, I realized that when I watched porn, I wasn't interested in sex with my partner, whatever relationship I happened to be in, or less interested, or I would compare, my mind would start these comparisons between what I was watching and the woman that I was with. And I started realizing that I didn't like that process. During my early 20s, as a man who doesn't seek help, as is the traditional sort of masculine narrative around mental health, I tried to do it myself. I thought I could willpower and determine my way through it. And it worked in terms of that temporary, short-lived experience of abstinence that willpower can provide until, enough stress, you're experiencing enough stress, enough overwhelming stress that all of a sudden, well, hey, I need to reach for the only stress reducer I know that works effectively and well. So willpower got me through several months at a time in terms of being able to move away from it. But it wasn't until I sort of got curious about this why. Why am I watching? What were the circumstances that would lead me to watch porn? So that was the first half, is understanding my why. When I got curious about why, the need for porn sort of disappeared. So I was able to move away from porn simply because I got curious around what was happening in my body during the moments of craving. So I had a series of questions that I asked myself when I did feel that impulse to watch porn, when I decided that it was literally like, this is the time to move away. I'm done with it. So I changed the way that I was moving away from it. So I'd ask myself when I was feeling the craving to watch porn. You had a question, Arlene.
I did. Thank you. I was like leaning in. Because I'm always very curious about the moment that someone goes, I just can't do this anymore. Like, this is a problem. I just can't, what was it doing to your self-esteem?
It was a lot. It was what it was doing to relationships, what it was doing to the way I related to women. So it was eroding my intimate relationships. So I knew that this had to go. What I realized was there was a pattern that around 6 months after the relationship started, after the honeymoon period is over, after the fireworks are done, and all of a sudden here comes this, the next phase of a relationship where communication and emotional vulnerability really come into play for creating that and forging that long-term connection. And those were skills I completely lacked.
Mm.
And I just had no idea. I had no idea what an emotion was in my late 20s. So to articulate,
Why? You didn't know, were
I
you
mean,
just completely out of touch with your
yeah,
emotions?
completely out of touch. So I knew what they were, obviously theoretically, but to actually connect, feel, and articulate was what I was feeling
Mm-hmm.
was unknown. And because of that disconnect from self, it also made things like boundaries and a sense of self and an expression of authentic needs, it made those completely foreign concepts. So here comes
Yeah.
the end of the honeymoon phase, and you have to actually connect with a person. And I just didn't know how to. So I end up saying yes when I mean no, and no when I mean yes, because I don't understand. I don't know how to communicate. I don't know how to assert my needs. And in an effort to almost passive aggressively rebel against conflict because I didn't know how to manage conflict, I would use porn as a crutch because that would self-soothe. And then, but as a consequence of choosing porn, then all of a sudden it was almost as if it was a tiny rendition of, in my mind, cheating. And I know that others may not or would agree that viewing porn is a form of cheating. For me, it wasn't like an intellectually accepted concept, but I felt that way. I felt that there was some kind of an erosion of trust and separation between my partner
Mhm.
because all of a sudden I have this behavior that's secret. I'm getting a need fulfilled that would have otherwise been fulfilled within the relationship. So it sort of began this spiral of, as soon as I watched it the first time after the 6-month period of abstinence, all of a sudden it got a little more frequent. And then the chasm between my partner and myself would continue to grow. And eventually it would lead to the spiral to the end of the relationship. It was almost trademark the way a series of relationships ended in this way. So that's what was the first, like, okay, this isn't working. This isn't what I want in my relationship. So I knew I had to learn something. In fact, at that time, I didn't know that the missing pieces were communication, assertive boundaries, asserting my needs. I never knew that until I started this deeper reflective work, but I knew something was going on because I saw the pattern.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting, this idea of cheating, because I guess it just depends on what your definition of cheating is. And I could see on, from one perspective, if you're not bringing your whole self to the relationship, if you're if you're meeting your sexual needs other ways, you're not really bringing your whole self or like full plate to the relationship. So but it's not as, but it's tricky, right? Because it's not as if you were talking to an actual person and developing a relationship and then having an, I don't know, extramarital, but you know what I'm saying? Like betraying
Absolutely.
your partner with somebody else. It's just, yeah, you're not
Yeah,
bringing your whole self.
absolutely right. And I think the best sort of litmus test for this, because we're all going to have different intellectual sort of ideas and concepts and theories about what this aspect of fidelity means, both for you
Mm,
individually as well as the context of the relationship and the couple, because every relationship is different to
right.
the degree and the depth that they want to show up. But the thing that never lies is our body. So for
Mm,
me, when I began to fully, and I mean fully, move away from porn, for the first 3 years of essentially quitting porn, there were a few times where I actually consciously chose to, I'm going to watch porn to see if there's still this experience of shame and guilt that, is in my body that I cannot avoid. And my body will tell me the truth to see if this is something that is adding benefit to my life or detracting from my life. And even after a period of a year abstinence, to consciously engage in it as an experiment, like a scientific experiment, and then to check in and say, okay, what's happening? What was like, and every time there's always shame and guilt. And it's like, where did that come from?
mhm,
But I didn't want to deny the reality of what my body was saying. So
right.
it ends up being, again, this aspect or this infusion of ruthless honesty. How does my body respond? How does my present moment experience respond to this behavior? And then the second question, can I share it openly, honestly, and transparently with my partner? And that's another degree of testing to see if I actually have some hidden unconscious beliefs about this behavior that I'm refusing to confront. So it really is it's a beautiful experiment to explore the why. And if we get curious what we're feeling before, during, and after a certain substance or behavior, whether it's smoking, whether it's alcohol, whether it's porn, whatever it may be. The second big reason why I knew that I wanted to move away from porn, because I didn't get to this and I want to share this, is I realized that my mind, as a result of mainstream porn, would objectify and sexualize nearly every woman that was like within my periphery. So it was this uncontrollable reaction of my mind jumping to um, sort of like this, they call it like a gaze. Like I realized that I was looking at women as sexual objects. And that was the wake up call. I'm like, there's no way that I want to relate to women in this way. And in fact, I had realized upon reflection that I didn't really have a lot of, if any, female friendships like actual platonic friendships of connection that don't involve some kind of sexual energy or sexual energetic dynamic, right? And the wake-up call was realizing and accepting that there was a chance that this instinctive reaction of my mind would be there for the rest of my life, because I started watching porn at 5 years old, where I accidentally
How are
stumbled
you
upon it.
how are you exposed to porn that young?
I just realized, like, I don't know how, intuition, whatever it was, I realized there was a little button on the back of the cable box that attached to the TV that when you flickered it on to the other direction, all of a sudden you have the old channels at that time, which were Playboy and Spice. And all of a sudden, here I am home alone, right? So why did I do it?
You were
Probably
home
because
alone at 5 years old?
yeah, there was moments where I mean, I grew up first generation immigrant, so there was unique opportunities for me to have these experiences. My guess, on reflection was, well, where's the connection? Well, I found connection. I found through a connection through this form. So yeah, I was exposed way too young, and so here
Yeah.
comes this script. And then by the time I'm really deciding that there's no room for this in my life, this is not the way I want to relate to women and the world, and I do want female friendships. And it wasn't until I accepted that these thoughts, these automatic thoughts, may be there for the rest of my life, that they started sort of softening and disappearing. So it was through true acceptance rather than
Mm-hmm.
judging myself and beating myself up for this, that it started moving away.
Yeah,
One of
that's
the
the
things that, go on.
sorry to interrupt you. That's one of the things about beating ourselves up. It's like trying to run a marathon on a broken leg. I mean, and if it worked, we would have been better already, but it doesn't work.
Yeah. Well,
Not to derail you too much. I'm going to ask you to keep track of that because I want to come
yeah.
back to what the points. They say the purpose of addiction is distraction, and sometimes, underneath everything, there's some core root trauma. And, when you're talking about being home alone, first generation of immigrant parents, I can't help but wonder what kind of trauma that you experienced in your childhood that the porn addiction is covering, right? Like there's always some sort, like they say that, alcoholism even is a symptom of a deeper problem. So what happened in your childhood that sort of was underneath all of this?
Well, you've thought you've derailed me, but you actually haven't, because this is where I was
Okay, good.
going, that if we look
Oh, nice.
at if we look at any behavior that we have a problematic relationship with, if we judge it, then we're not really taking into consideration the fact that this behavior was a solution for a problem or a pain that we didn't know how to deal with when it first
Exactly.
originated.
Yeah.
So this is why when we go after and we get curious about what we're avoiding, the pain that we're avoiding, the trauma that we're avoiding, the emotional wounds that we're avoiding, all of a sudden the need for the protector, the need for the solution
Mm-hmm.
disappears. So that was the interesting thing about moving away from porn for me, was that I didn't try. It just disappeared because I got curious about this pain. And when we talk about that pain, of course, we're talking about early childhood experiences, as you've alluded to. The work of Gabor Mate, which you may be familiar with, has
Oh yeah.
really been pivotal in this field, in this industry. I'm one of the students of compassionate inquiry, his psychotherapeutic approach. So I'm a facilitator, I'm a mentor. It's how I do work with people in terms of CI being the foundational cornerstone of the approach that I use, because of this way of viewing our challenges and our problems and our emotions and our trauma in a very compassionate, gentle way.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of my own story, I don't, for me, it's some people, I've had many clients who sort of compare themselves to others and say, you know what, I didn't have anything bad happen to me compared to that person. I didn't have any of this huge trauma happen, but it's not just about that. It's these little things. And for me, I had hardworking first generation immigrant parents from Poland working their ass off to create a better life for my brother and I. But as a consequence, there's neglect. There's, because of their own emotional wounding, there isn't the emotional holding or awareness or intelligence that's transmitted onto us. So we are left sort of having to fend for ourselves. And in order to do that, we have to close ourselves off from our own emotions in order to survive in this strange environment where we're surviving, we're not thriving, we're not in social connection, we're just getting by. So it was, I wouldn't say there was anything big, but it doesn't have to be big. And in fact, when someone says, when my clients say, "Oh, well, that's not such a big deal," what we're really doing is we're minimizing the pain of this small child having gone through that experience. When we visualize a child going through an experience of loneliness and neglect, that's quite traumatizing on the child's psyche, because to them, that's when they need the most emotional support, is during those early formative years when they need an attuned, present adult so that they can learn, like experientially learn, that there's a beginning, a peak, and an end to their uncomfortable emotional experience. If we don't have that experience as children, then as an adult, when we feel the beginning remnants of a negative emotion, because we never had the experience of relief and soothing from that emotion, there's a part of our brain, a part of us that believes this negativity or this pain will last forever. And that's the scary part, because to the child who doesn't have a concept of time, it can feel like forever. So it's not surprising that as an adult, because we haven't passed through this experience, we are literally scared that this experience is going to last forever.
Yeah, no, that's a very common experience. And you were talking about neglect. I mean, I grew up in the latchkey kid era. Sounds like you did too. I don't know if they called it that where you grew up, but like for instance, my husband, his parents were divorced and his mother was a nurse. And so she was working 12-hour shifts. And so nothing bad happened to him, like he wasn't abused but it was this benign neglect that has had a really significant impact on him. And that's something that it's comparative to complex post-traumatic stress disorder, because it's ongoing, it's persistent, and it really, informs the default mode network, your brain's operating system, right? And I have found that it's very difficult to, even with therapy and lots of treatment, it's persistent. It's persistent through your entire adulthood. And that's why I was so interested in, some of the solution. We'll talk about some of the solutions, like reparenting and getting into your body and processing to resolution, all those things. But it sounds like you may have had a similar childhood experience where you had good parents, but there was this benign neglect.
Absolutely right. And this is why I think that the words trauma and addiction have certain connotations to them, where I think rather than being sort of reserved for the diagnostic field, I think they're relatively human experiences. When we consider addiction,
Right.
it might be better understand that as the behavior that we engage in to self-soothe our unconscious pain that we're not paying attention to. Or trauma might be better understood as the conditioning that our nervous system, that is imprinted on our nervous system as a result of the environment that we grew up in. And the reason I think that trauma is a universal human experience to some degree, everyone's experiencing it in a different way, shape, or form, but it's because we are born a blank canvas. In fact, well, maybe only in the moment of conception, we're a blank canvas of pure potential. All of a sudden, the environment of mom in the womb begins to greatly impact our development and our nervous system and even our reactivity within that. And then when we're born, all of a sudden we start to have this unlimited potential, again, further walled in by the behaviors, expectations, and subconscious relational patterns of our parents and our immediate environment. So to go from unlimited potential to something within a box is a traumatic experience. No matter how good of a job the parents might think they're doing, even if they're the best parents in the world, it's not a comfortable experience to be boxed in.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Even the best of us. I had a girlfriend tell me when my son was little, I was so worried I was going to ruin him. And she was like, Arlena, nobody escapes childhood without some issues, right? Like
Yeah.
we have to learn to live in the world. And then it seems like we spend the rest of our adult lives trying to live up to our potential, like you were saying. So
Yeah.
I'm just so curious, in your own recovery journey, where did you start?
I think again, it was willpower, so it didn't work. It wasn't until
Right. Yeah.
and
Then the
it
real work
was,
begins.
yeah, the real work begins. And I found a teacher, a counselor, a therapist here in Auckland, um, right at the end of my 20s, maybe when I was 30. And he really opened my eyes to feeling an emotion. I think it was the first time I just remember breaking down into tears in front of another human being like that. And I didn't know that um, I could, or if it was possible. It literally snuck up on me. I don't know. It was his presence or whatever it was, but it came out. And the relief, I walked out of that first session and everything was brighter. Everything stood
Mm.
out more. Everything literally shifted. And I was like, okay, there's something to this expression thing. And it was the beginning of my journey. And for me, it was just a deep dive. I had been helping people with health and wellness as a health and wellness sort of coach and expert in a variety of different sort of fields, massage, personal training, nutrition stuff. But it was in that moment that I realized, okay, this is the way that I want to help people. And it just began this immense immersion in emotional awareness and really discovering myself, doing retreats, doing workshops, reading books, taking on different practices, taking on practices with a different way of relating to myself, because meditation might be um, an activity of the mind and we're doing it to improve our focus or relax, right? But meditation can also be a transformational tool that connects us to our body. It helps us to understand and articulate the language of the body, which is the sensations that we feel. And it allows us to diffuse reactivity if we sit and observe what happens to us without reaction. So again, meditation can be just a nice relaxing activity, or it can be a tool for transformation if we allow it to be. So how I practiced shifted as well. Working out transformed from um, this punishment because I wasn't good enough and I had to look a certain way or be a certain way. So it was essentially a form of beating myself up because I wasn't good enough in this moment. And then it slowly transformed into, well, actually, I'm just going to move every day because it's a gift for my body. And I'm going to listen to my body and see what it needs today to thrive. Does it need strength training? Does it need a swim? Does it need yoga? I can listen and pay attention and really listen to what is most appropriate for my body in the moment. And so then all of a sudden, all of these things change, the meaning changes behind it. And that becomes healing and therapeutic because we're relating to ourselves in a different way. Even in exercise, even something like an ice bath, I'm a big believer in cold exposure. And yeah, I can see you shivering over there.
I know this is a podcast. You can't see me shivering. I know, but it's something that we've been considering. We saw Wim Hof speak at an event, and that was the first time I had been made aware of it. He was on the Tim Ferriss podcast. And I was like, who is this Wim Hof guy? I like the breathing practices. And then just there's been so much talk about cold exposure. And so my husband and I were like playing with the idea, oh, maybe we should get one of those. Like we live in an area where it snows and gets cold. So we were thinking, oh, maybe we get one of those big horse troughs and put it on the side. But like, yeah, I can't even tolerate cold water in the shower yet. So we're a little delusional at this point. But how do you do the, I have a few questions actually. I want to circle back to the books that you like. I know you like Warm Mate and some of the practices, but how did you start with the cold exposure therapy? Because I hear, I mean, if you read the literature on how good it is for your body, I mean, the literature and the data is overwhelmingly positive. But for someone like me who can't stand it, how did you start?
Well, my motivation was physical. So again, it started in the physical realm because I had moved to New Zealand and I came from Santa Monica, California, where it's always sunny. Right. So here I'm moving from Santa Monica and I moved to New Zealand. All of a sudden, the constantly changing weather patterns, and I'm getting sick. I got sick 6 times in 9 months. And I'm like, this is unheard of. Like, I just had no idea. And I sort of chalked it up to, well, maybe my body's just not used to this constantly changing weather patterns. In Auckland, you can have wind, rain, hail, sunshine, all in within like a 20-minute period. The weather changes so quickly
20
sometimes.
minutes.
I mean, I'm maybe exaggerating, maybe
Oh,
2 hour period. I mean, but even two
all in
hours
a
to have
day.
all in a day, for sure, all in a day. So
Yeah.
sometimes we can have days like that. And my body just wasn't used to it. So I started doing some research and I found, well, if you contrast, cold showers with sauna, it helps your body to get used to this weather variability. So that's what I started doing with my body, and I stopped getting sick. And so then I loved the results. So I started getting deeper into it. And so then after the cold showers, I started doing ice baths. I did more research on that. I don't get sick anymore because I do ice baths regularly. You can't see it, but there's an ice bath right there, a sauna right there. So it's in my home now. So it's just
Nice.
part of my regular sort of practice. But again, the the activity can be for physical health, or you can take it deeper. So with cold exposure, I started getting curious about the emotional benefits, because when we submerge in the cold, as you said, you don't like the cold water. So what happens when we get into the cold is the body experiences a state of panic and fear. And so here's this beautiful laboratory of learning how to relate to the experience of panic and fear in a very controlled environment. So
Mm.
someone can do a cold shower or an ice bath and be really tense and rigid and try to sort of muscle through the experience and count down the times. Okay, just 30 more seconds, 30 more seconds. But what we're actually doing is we're reinforcing the stress response, and we're actually, we're not improving our capacity to be with stressful situations.
Mm.
We might get the physical benefits, some of the circulatory benefits, but we're not doing anything to learn how to manage the stressed state of our body. So when we do cold exposure, whether it's a cold shower or an ice bath, what might be useful is to check in with the body, see if we can relax into the experience, get curious around how the mind and body are responding to the fear, to the panic, to the cold, and also to see if we can soften and surrender to the cold and allow ourselves to feel the cold. And then again, we transform the experience from something that is just a physical activity with physical health benefits, but we actually get this deep transformational um, uh, sort of transformational experience where we learn what the word acceptance feels like. Because we talk about, yeah, I want to be more accepting of things. I can guarantee you that the cold will show you if you're actually practicing acceptance, because you can't, the body will not hide your reaction. You can literally practice, okay, so this is what acceptance feels like. It sucks, but I am accepting the cold right now. And your body
Yeah.
won't lie.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? How that could be a quite useful experiment to
Yeah.
teach us to actually accept.
Yeah. No, and I would imagine that your acceptance has like degrees to it, right?
Yes.
Like, and you can build up a tolerance for it, like you can build up your weight resistance in the gym.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and then you get more resilient. Your window of stress tolerance grows
Mm.
as we engage in these conscious practices. And one of the sort of myths is that, well, again, as a man trying to go down the path of spiritual personal growth and healing, we think we can do it in isolation. So we think if we meditate enough, that all of a sudden our problems will go away. But in fact, these practices, meditation, breath work, cold exposure, they're a preparation for, they are not a substitute for. We can never substitute or avoid the work of facing the pain that happened in relationship. We were
Mm.
we were born into relationship, we were wounded in relationship, and we heal in relationship. And that's a quote I believe from Harville Hendrix. So we can't avoid the eventual confrontation with this pain that is going to happen when we're in relationship with our kids, with our partners, with our parents. And this is where we really, really dive into and lean on the practices that we've been doing. This is where we can take the practice and it becomes useful and helpful for us.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You mentioned, it's like there's a lot of people who want to heal in secret or heal alone. That's to me, that's a trauma response. I've had people who say, well, I just want to do it on my own. Like they try to stop drinking on their own or, um, you know, as, any kind of addiction. There's this thing, people want to do it on their own. And there's some sort of, I think it's so interesting how like mainstream society has this idea that if you do it on your own, there's some sort of merit. But in my mind, that's kind of the chicken shit way out because it requires no vulnerability. There's no accountability. And I think it takes so much more courage to be transparent with somebody to say, this is what's really going on with me and risking that, risking being vulnerable. But if you find somebody who is trustworthy, then I don't know. It seems like that's when the real healing happens, is when you're able to be vulnerable and share with somebody and they're a safe person and they respond appropriately. There's like that connection that happens. That's when healing happens. But I really don't believe in healing in secret.
Absolutely. I think that the individual work can only take you so far, that
Yeah.
at some point that vulnerability will be key. And to find and have those safe relationships in your life that you are allowed to be vulnerable and be accepted in that vulnerability is how we heal those deepest wounds, the deepest wounds that sort of taught us that it's unsafe to connect, that we have to hide an aspect of ourselves. And I love that you use the word transparency, because that's one of the things that was an early commitment in the process of forging new relationships with potential partners with women. Was if I was going to um, do a relationship or be in a relationship different, my first step was with vulnerability and transparency rather than waiting for the 6 month mark or whatever it may be. It became this, it was amazing practice, because immediately I'm like, this is who I am. It was no hiding anything. And it was great because you either met people that you resonated with right away, or the people that it was not compatible, I learned right away, hey, this isn't going to work. And that's great for both of us to know that, because at
Yeah.
least I know who I am and I'm not willing to compromise that. So again, that transparency is so important.
Yeah. Do you have an example of ways that you're vulnerable with people? Is it like if they do something that you're not comfortable with, you speak up and go, "Hey, I felt really uncomfortable. I felt really weird about this situation. Can we talk about it?" Or like, how did that manifest for you?
So for me, one of the example that comes to my mind is how I moved away from people pleasing. So there's a
Mm.
difference between being a kind, generous person consciously, and there's a difference between doing that unconsciously as a way of essentially controlling or manipulating the situation so that you're okay, if
That
that
takes a
makes
lot of
sense.
self-awareness.
Yeah,
As
but
I'm
that's
only saying this as a recovering people pleaser.
it does, but it became
So
an
hard.
experiment. It was and it is. And again, I told you from that first moment when when I had my first counseling session, it became my sole focus in life. So I got so curious about every one of my behaviors, and people pleasing was one of them.
Yeah.
And so I had to actually practice letting people hold a negative opinion of me. So when
Oh,
someone said something bad about me or to me, I would almost like feel the knee-jerk response to defend myself or try to um,
explain.
explain or fix or make sure that they see me in a positive light. And I would pause myself and say, if I want to practice being authentically myself, I also have to practice letting someone be authentically themselves and trusting that whatever they're thinking, believing, or perceiving is exactly as it's meant to be. And I don't need to try to force them to change their opinion. And that was very uncomfortable at
When you
first
see
till,
my face, I'm like, oh my God, that sounds awful.
yeah, but it worked
It
to
worked.
dis, to,
Did that change? Sorry for interrupting, but I just have to ask this. So, because as a people pleaser, my validation oftentimes still, even after all this time, is external. And I have like my typical red flags where I like, oh, I'm crossing my own boundary with trying to manage somebody else's my image in somebody else's eyes. Right. And so I go, oh, that's right. My only job is to, turn inward and check out my own feelings to see, is this something I'm doing? Is something that feels good to me, and be honest with myself about it. Like, what is my mood? I create a lot of content. It's like, like writing a book. I would imagine writing this book was a great exercise in turning external validation to internal validation, like what is really true for you.
yeah, I mean, it's one of the reasons why this book took 7 years to write.
Oh,
Was
7 years.
so it was because I've written a couple books before, but it was a collation of information that anyone that
Mm.
can do research can here's a bunch of information of other people's minds, and here's an argument for that. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to provide a book that was practical, accessible, and relatable.
Mm.
So I did infuse my own healing journey into this story, and it was cathartic. It probably is the reason why it's so easily for me to speak about my own journey, is because I've written about it with such care and detail that every word that has a purpose, right? So something that I never realized, the amount of intention that can go into the words. And I also like the way you've described that you would question your own motives, and that's what I had to do. when it came to people pleasing and asserting my needs and drawing boundaries, all of this is in the realm of people pleasing, essentially having a boundary there and really being curious and ruthlessly honest with my motives. Who was I doing this for? Was I doing this for myself? Was I doing it for the other person? And even if there were moments of people pleasing where I consciously accepted it, and that changed it from a trauma reaction that I had shame and guilt into saying, hey, you know what? I consciously chose to people please in this moment because it was whatever the convenient way out in this moment, and I'm not going to beat myself up over that because I know that the infusion of conscious choice changes it from being that thing that we beat ourselves up about because, oh, why didn't I draw that boundary? Why didn't I just say no? Why did I have to try to force that issue? So again, it's that conscious reflection and choice that changes it. And then you can discern for yourself, am I being authentically generous, or am I just wasting my energy because I'm trying to control this specific relationship?
Yeah, that's really tricky. That takes a lot of mindfulness to be able to do that. You know, as you were talking about there, I was curious, is there a story in the book that you were afraid to tell?
Yeah, I think every time I wrote anything about porn use, in fact, actually, I'll tell you a specific one. When I was writing about how my mind would sexualize and objectify women, when I wrote the details of that story in the book, I started that section with like almost like an apology to the reader, like almost like a shameful
Mm,
apology of like that I was sorry that this reaction was present in me, almost like again that shame and the guilt really was pronounced. And my editor read that and she replied back to me and said, "Do you really think you need to apologize for this?" I think like she really asked me to reflect on what was the motivation behind that. And I got rid of the apology and I just owned it in the book, and I owned it in a human way rather than trying to shamefully apologize for this reaction that I really had no control over its formation. So I guess that's an example of a story um, that required me to really get curious around my motivations and why I was writing it.
yeah, it's really interesting. The process of writing a book is sometimes you don't really realize what you think until you write it all out. And
Yeah.
then you see it in black and white, and you're like, it does make you sort of reflect, and maybe it changes your mind about since like what did I really do, I really believe that? It's like we don't often have the opportunity to question our beliefs, and I think that's one of the reasons why journaling is so powerful, because when you see it in black and white, or if you're trying to get something out, you
Mhm.
realize that there's some information missing, or um, that maybe you haven't even examined your own belief system.
Yes. And I think any practice that allows us to turn inwards and reflect on that precise mechanism, on those core beliefs, I
Mhm.
think is a beautiful practice. So some people may be journaling, some people will be therapy, counseling, others will be meditation. Whatever allows that process to start, by all means continue. So that's
Yeah.
the important bit, is that the capacity to reflect, to look inward and see if this is actually valid and still continues to be true or not.
Yeah. The 12 steps for me were really the first time I was pretty young. I was 25 when I was introduced to it. That was the first time I had any kind of self-examination process. Did you do 12 steps at all?
No, I didn't, but I am familiar with it, and I understand again the benefits of having such a structure. So some people
Yeah.
there's a love there seems to be a polarizing view on some of these structures and programs, and
Oh my gosh, that is the understatement of the year.
I was
It's
being
very gentle. That was
I
very
was being as
gentle. Yes,
I was
there's a
being as gentle.
huge. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, the book I'm writing about is the 12-step exploration guide. It's to offer context and perspective to challenging ideas.
Yes,
I
beautiful.
want
And I
people to
think
be people to be able to move. There are ways to move through and past challenging obstacles, because it is really a very
yeah.
interesting. It's a worthy endeavor. That's all I'm trying to say. It's a worthy endeavor, but it's so polar. Everyone's going to be mad at me when this thing comes out, but I'm going to be okay with that.
Yeah. Well, the fact that you can bring some nuance and context to something that is viewed as black and white is quite helpful.
Yeah.
And the way that I've explained it to both, I think an argument that might assist for both sides' understanding of it is that when we are addicted or we find ourselves in the experience of addiction, where it's the cyclical um, experience of reaction, self-soothing, pain, self-soothing, because we don't have a sense of self, at least I'm speaking from my own perspective and my own experience, if we never had the sense of self and that structure around us to help us feel safe, 12-step is a beautiful compartment and structure that allows us the structure to explore and discover ourselves.
Right.
For some, that structure may stick around for some time, for the entirety of the life, for however long that person feels it's necessary to support themselves. At some point, for some people, that structure no longer becomes necessary because they've discovered themselves and they self-develop a structure from within themselves based on boundaries, assertive communication, whatever it may be. But it really is up to the person to discern the degree to which that structure helps and supports their process of discovering themselves,
100%.
what is beneath the surface of that addictive behavior.
100%. Yeah. I never only did 12 step. I'm greedy. I like to do all the things. I like 12 step therapy,
Yeah.
all kinds of different, A Course in Miracles, all kinds of communities. I'm a voracious free. I do all the things. Like I've never been just, and I don't treat it like a religion, but I can't imagine not having had that. My life would be vastly different if I hadn't had that transformational experience. But yeah, you mentioned I actually want to bring you back to something you said earlier. You mentioned books and practices, and my audience, I think they read as much as I do because I get all kinds of book recommendations from people. And we talked about Gabor Mate a few times. Were there any other books that helped you in your early recovery?
So Gabor Mate's In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts
Mhm.
changed my worldview on addiction, on drugs, on trauma, on therapy. It was the book that literally motivated me to getting a drug and alcohol postgrad degree at the University of
Wow.
Auckland here. So I was like, yep, this is the pathway I'm going down.
Okay.
My work with my first teacher introduced me to Michael Brown's The Presence Process.
The presence
And
process. I have not heard that one.
the presence process is this beautiful book that is spread around the world through word of mouth, and it has communities all over the world doing the practice because it introduced me to consciously connected breathing, which is a very powerful emotional integration tool. I remember the first time I did a consciously connected breathing practice as guided by the book, because the book is more than a book, it's also a sort of a program. And I remember opening my eyes, having the experience of having no thoughts, and I started crying because I never thought I could be free of that burden of constant rumination and constant analysis and judgment. So to have moments of separation and freedom from that was quite transformative. Yeah, so that started my journey. Gabor Mate's books have helped. Peter Levine's books, Waking the
Wow.
Tiger, really helped me
Yeah.
understand trauma on a deeper perspective. Um, yeah, and so I would say I think those were some of the pivotal seminal books
I love it.
of my early recovery.
Can I
Yeah.
ask you about the conscious connected breathing? Is that something that you could do a quick overview or demonstration of?
Well, it's like it's if anyone's familiar with Wim Hof breathing. So
Uh-huh.
am I allowed to cuss on on this podcast?
Sure.
So
Fuck
so Wim
yeah.
Hof says fuck yeah, so Wim Hof says just get the fucking air in your body. And I appreciate the way he says that because there's so many sort of dissections of what breath work is supposed to be like and
Yeah.
look like. There's a lot of
Uh-huh.
interpretations of it, and Wim just cuts right to the simplicity of it. Just get
Yeah.
the fucking air in your body.
Yeah.
And the way consciously connected breathing works, it's the way I describe it, it's like a single continuous circular breath. So there's a
Uh,
conscious in breath, and then without any pause, there's the exhale. And without any pause, there's goes right into the next inhale. But the inhale is conscious, and then the exhale is instant. And then and when we breathe in that way, because it's a little faster, because it's a little deeper, it begins to activate our sympathetic nervous system. So it's this beautiful activation where we actually get to witness the body going into a stressed state. Just like the breath changes when the body is stressed, when the breath changes, we induce and we change our nervous system response to that as a result. So conscious breathing, again, activates the nervous system. So everyone's going to feel it differently. They might feel sweats, shivers, colds, anxiety, fear, panic, lightheadedness, whatever it is, everyone's going to have a different experience. But what the main goal or intention or benefit is that we watch our body in a state of stillness as it goes into a stress state, and then it peaks, and then it passes away. And this is very useful information for us to have. Okay, I can experience stress, and I can also be present for it, and I can experience the end of that stress when either in the middle of the breathwork sessions, those uncomfortable experiences pass away, or when we end the breathwork session, we find that we are far more relaxed and our mind is clear. During the journey, however, is our medicine, right? Everyone's going to experience something differently, and it might be helpful to conceptualize the discomfort that we pass through as the medicine that we need to process and digest as we pass through this uncomfortable experience. So
yeah, you have that chapter. You have that chapter in your book called "Fun Comfortable."
Yeah, let's get fun comfortable. So conscious discomfort is something that I do believe in. And when I say let's get fun comfortable, it's because it may be fucking uncomfortable, but eventually it becomes fun as well. So it's fun comfortable. And I didn't make that up. I think I read it from someone years back. The name escapes me. I don't know who taught me that, but it's not mine. I won't take credit for it. I just forget who
but I know
that.
I appreciate you, putting it in the book and talking about these things. It's like, and this is how the information gets disseminated, right? Is we just keep talking about it, and it doesn't really matter who thought of it or whatever. I mean, if I ever have an original idea, of course I want credit for it. But let's just say this was, I mean, I love my teachers, all my teachers, and they come in a variety of forms. But I love that idea of getting, and you know what's really funny though, Luke, is people that are in recovery, we are so often in uncomfortable situations. It's like, and I've been really playing with this idea of turning defects into assets. It's like, well, the persistence and determination required to persist in addiction, we can turn that and focus it on our developmental healing. And you mentioned several practices that I've tried myself. I love, for a period of time, I do practices and then I get bored and I need to do something else. But there are so many that's fun to kind of have like this smorgasbord of healthy tools. But for a while, I was doing the Wim Hof breathing first because my body is just so my energy just needs a place to go. So it was almost as if, so you can, and it's on YouTube, it's very short and it's got like the expanding circles and then it contracts and expands and contracts. So it's visually engaging, but I would do that first and then do a Tara Brach meditation. Have you heard of the RAIN meditation, right, Tara Brach?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, of course you have. So RAIN stands for recognize, allow, investigate, and nurture. And so the breathing would calm my physical body. And then the RAIN meditation would help me to attach and resolve the feelings that would arise. Right? Because processing feelings to resolution was not something that came naturally to me. I didn't have like an attuned parent to help me, go through that. That's really interesting. I never heard of anybody talking about like it reaches the peak and then it disseminates. And then we have this experience of like, oh, I don't have to resist this feeling or be afraid of this feeling. It resolves. We have the conclusion. And if you're high, then you never experience the conclusion.
Yes. Well, just like, and sort of like coffee and low energy, we never experience the end of low energy and naturally move into normal and high energy states because we reach for something to assist us in this uncomfortable state of low energy. The body is naturally moving through cycles, but we never allow ourselves to pass through the full cycle of low energy back into high energy. Again, is something
I need to get shit done. So achievement junkie. So
I love
coffee
it.
is good.
And This is where the tagline in my book comes from. The mind tells stories, the body speaks the truth.
God damn it. Uncomfortable truth. Maybe I just need to take a nap in the afternoon.
Well, that's
Um,
it's the body's always giving us signals.
yeah.
That's the main message of Somawise, is that the body's always giving us signals, and the mind is attaching a story to that. But there might be more benefit to getting clued in and connected with what is the body really telling me in this moment.
Okay.
Um, a little bit back to what you shared as well. I also do that quite frequently in terms of breath work first and then meditation after. And
Ah,
it's a beautiful combination and a recommendation or a offering that would be very helpful for many listeners to do 5 to 10 to 15 minutes of breath work before settling into a 10, 20, 30-minute meditation practice, because the breath work sort of gets that energy discharged, and then it's easier to settle into our present moment experience thereafter. So what you've stumbled upon through intuition is quite an effective approach. So kudos for you, to you, for being able to navigate and allow your intuition to guide that process, again listening to your body and allowing yourself that wisdom to emerge spontaneously.
yeah. And because it came up for me because a lot of people, I hear a lot of people saying, I preach meditation all the time, and there's so much resistance. People just, so I feel like if you tire the body, the mind will settle sometimes, but the breathing, I don't know, there was something so cleansing about it. It's very restorative. It does help. So, um, listen, I could talk to you forever. I want to be respectful of your time. I just want to say that, the book Somawise is laid out so nicely. So there's the introduction where you talk about, how to listen to your body. And then you talk about the environment of healing. So healthy lifestyle principles, but it's not just, and of course we talked a little bit about stillness, conscious discomfort, radical acceptance. There's actually a whole book called Radical Acceptance, as you know. Um, yeah, so healing and trauma. This is just such a well thought out book. It really shows that 7 years, that's so much deep internal work for a book. It was well worth the wait. It's very well done, and I just applaud all your efforts and getting all of this together in such a concise but easy to read format. Um, if people want to learn more about you or reach out to you, where should we send them?
So the best resource would be my website, which presently is lukesnewski.com. So just my full name.com.
Do you want to
And
spell your last name?
yeah, sure. It's S as in Sam, N as in Nancy, Iewski, as any Polish name would end with an
Of
SKI.
course, with an SKI. You said you can call me Snooski, and I'm like, I'll just call you Luke.
You took the easy way out. I appreciate it.
I did. I'm
Uh,
such a cheater. Shortcuts. I'm all about the shortcuts. It's not cheating. Well, listen, it was such a pleasure to talk to you. I know you have lots of things in the book that we didn't get to even touch on. But that's why people need to go get the book. So, thank you so much for your time today. And I always have such a soft spot in my heart for people who are trying to help others. So thank you for all the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Arlene. I appreciate it. And I have a soft spot for all of us on this journey of healing and helping others as well. So pleasure to be here.
Thank you.